The afternoon sun was beginning to sink low in the sky, casting a warm orange glow over the bustling city square. People hurried past, some carrying groceries, others talking on phones, and a few tourists snapping pictures of the tall buildings around them. Among the crowd, there was a sense of hurry and purpose, but also a faint layer of indifference. Everyone was wrapped up in their own world, moving quickly, hardly noticing anything else. Near the center of the square stood a grand piano, polished and gleaming despite its outdoor setting. It was not unusual for the city to place pianos in public spaces for people to play, but most of the time, the instruments remained untouched. Today, though, there was a small group of onlookers gathering around, waiting for someone to show up and entertain them. Some were curious, others skeptical. Laughter occasionally rippled through the crowd as people exchanged jokes about who might sit down and attempt to play. Through the sea of people, a young girl moved quietly. She wore clothes that had seen better days, faded and torn in places, and her shoes were scuffed and worn. Her hair was tangled and dusty, evidence of long days spent navigating streets without a clear home. She carried herself with a quiet, almost invisible presence, the kind that allowed her to pass unnoticed by most. But there was a steady confidence in her steps, something unspoken that drew her toward the piano, even though she did not belong in that world. Or so it seemed. As she approached the piano, the people around her began to notice. A few smirked and whispered to one another. "Look at her," one said, barely concealing a chuckle. "Does she really think she can play that piano?" Another laughed and shook their head, drawing attention from the rest of the small crowd. The security guard, a tall man with broad shoulders, leaned against a nearby pillar. He was used to watching the occasional street performer, most of whom had little skill and relied on antics or funny tricks to entertain. He watched the girl with mild curiosity, expecting yet another failed attempt. The girl didn't respond to the laughter or the stares. She walked up to the piano and touched the keys lightly with her fingers, almost as if she were greeting an old friend. There was a moment of hesitation, a pause where the world seemed to hold its breath. People around her exchanged amused glances, still expecting some clumsy fumbling or awkward performance. But the girl's eyes were steady, focused on the keys beneath her fingers, and there was a quiet determination in the way she sat down. She adjusted her posture, not perfectly, but in a way that suggested familiarity with the instrument. Her hands hovered over the keys, tense at first, then gradually relaxing as she began to move them. The first note she played was soft, almost timid, but it carried a clarity and precision that immediately drew attention. A few people in the crowd stopped laughing, their curiosity piqued. The security guard straightened up, his eyes narrowing slightly as he leaned in, trying to understand what he was seeing. This wasn't the usual street performance he had witnessed before. The girl continued to play, her fingers moving with a rhythm that seemed both natural and practiced. The music she produced was gentle at first, simple notes that slowly began to form a melody. It was clear she wasn't just pressing keys at random. There was a story in her playing, a sense of emotion that reached out to the crowd in a way that words could not. People began to gather closer, their laughter fading into silence, replaced by quiet curiosity. Some faces softened, and a few even furrowed their brows, touched by something they couldn't quite explain. As the melody grew, so did the attention of those around her. Passers-by stopped to watch, phones raised not to record, but out of a genuine desire to see what would happen next. The girl didn't seem to notice the growing crowd. Her eyes were fixed on the piano, her fingers dancing over the keys with surprising skill. It was not a flashy performance filled with complex tricks, but a raw, honest expression of something deep within her. People could feel it, even if they didn't understand music the way professionals did. The security guard, who had been skeptical from the start, found himself caught off guard. He was used to thinking he could judge people quickly, to categorizing them based on appearances and first impressions. But here was a girl who defied every expectation. She looked like she had nothing, yet she was giving everything through her music. He felt an unfamiliar tug at his chest, a mixture of awe and something like respect. For the first time that day, he was completely still, unable to tear his eyes away from the piano. Some of the children in the crowd edged closer, captivated by the sounds flowing from the instrument. Their parents, too, found themselves lingering, listening to a melody that seemed to come from a place of pure emotion. There were no gimmicks, no showy tricks, just a girl and a piano, creating a moment that felt bigger than the busy city around them. The air was filled with a strange energy, a quiet connection that seemed to bind the audience together. Even for just a few minutes, the girl's music began to change subtly, the notes rising and falling with more confidence. Each press of a key seemed intentional, precise, yet full of feeling. It was clear she was not just playing a song, she was telling a story. Some people shifted in their seats, drawn in by the narrative that unfolded in the melody. Others held their breath, not wanting to disturb the fragile beauty of the moment. The laughter and whispers that greeted her rival had vanished, replaced by a growing sense of admiration and awe. A few older people in the crowd exchanged glances, shaking their heads slightly, as if to confirm what they were hearing was real. They had seen many performances in their lives, but rarely something so simple, yet so profoundly moving. The girl's hands moved with a grace and confidence that contradicted her appearance. There was a quiet power in her playing, a strength born from something far deeper than practice alone. It was as if her fingers carried the weight of her life experiences, translating them into music that everyone could feel. The city square, usually filled with noise and the chatter of hurried conversations, seemed to quiet down around her. Even the birds perched nearby seemed to pause, their heads tilting as though listening. People stopped in their tracks, not wanting to miss a single note. The security guard, who had never allowed himself to feel moved by street performances before, now found tears prickling his eyes. He turned his face slightly, hoping no one would notice, but the raw emotion of the music had already reached him. Time seemed to slow as she continued to play. The sun dipped lower, casting longer shadows across the square, but no one noticed. They were all caught in the moment, suspended in the beauty of her performance. The girl, completely absorbed, didn't glance at the crowd. She played not for applause or recognition, but because it was the only way she could express herself fully. The world around her, the laughter, the doubts, the skepticism, simply melted away in the music. As the first part of her melody came to a close, there was a gentle pause. The audience, unsure of what to do, held their breath for just a moment. Then, without being prompted, soft claps began to emerge, quickly growing louder. People cheered quietly, some wiping away tears, others smiling in disbelief. The security guard approached slightly, nodding his head in respect, acknowledging that he had been wrong to underestimate her. The girl looked up briefly, a small, shy smile crossing her face, but she did not let it distract her. She returned to the keys, ready to continue the story she was telling through her music. Even as the applause continued, the city square had transformed. It was no longer just a place people passed through. It had become a space where strangers connected through an unexpected moment of beauty. The girl, once invisible and underestimated, had captured the hearts of everyone around her. And for the security guard, for the children, for the adults, and even for the few tourists, this was the beginning of a story they would remember long after the music faded away. The girl's hands moved across the keys with a rhythm that felt almost alive. Each note she pressed carried a hint of emotion, as if it was telling the story of her life, the hardships she had faced, and the little joys she had found along the way. Her fingers danced lightly but confidently, creating sounds that were both delicate and strong at the same time. The people watching could not look away. Even the security guard, who had approached her cautiously, stood rooted to the spot, mesmerized by the music. As the melody grew, the crowd began to change. The initial curiosity and amusement had shifted to genuine attention and quiet awe. Strangers who had been moving in different directions had stopped, forming a semicircle around her. They did not speak, not wanting to disturb the unfolding magic. The notes floated through the air, soft at first and then swelling with intensity. Every person listening felt a tug at their heart, as though the music had the power to touch the deepest parts of their souls. Children, who often struggled to sit still for more than a few seconds, were completely captivated. They leaned forward on their toes, eyes wide, and faces filled with wonder. Some even tried to imitate the movements of her fingers on the imaginary keys they drew in the air. The girl did not look at them directly, but a quiet warmth seemed to emanate from her playing, filling the space around her and making everyone feel included in the moment. The melody changed subtly, evolving into something more complex. The crowd could sense the story deepening. There was a part of the music that seemed to reflect struggle, a darker undertone that hinted at the difficult path the girl had walked. The people watching could feel the weight of her experiences through the sound. They imagined long nights spent on cold streets, days filled with hunger, and moments of loneliness. Yet all of it had shaped the strength and beauty in her music. The security guard, who had never been moved by street performances before, found himself unexpectedly emotional. He remembered his own difficult times, the moments when life had seemed impossible. And he felt a strange connection to this girl whose appearance had once made him skeptical. He shifted slightly, careful not to show too much, but his eyes glistened with tears he could not fully hide. He understood, without a word being spoken, that her music was not just for entertainment. It was a form of expression that transcended age, language, and background. Adults in the crowd were just as affected. Some had come to the square with errands to run, meetings to attend, or appointments to keep. Yet, as the music continued, they felt a strange pull that made them pause, almost unwilling to leave the space the girl had created. Their shoulders relaxed, their minds quieted, and for a few precious minutes, they were able to escape the worries and stresses of their daily lives. The girl's music had created a temporary sanctuary, a safe and beautiful space in the middle of the busy city. The girl's expression remained calm and focused, but there was a subtle intensity in her eyes. Every note was played with purpose, yet there was a softness that suggested vulnerability. It was clear she was giving a piece of herself with every key she pressed. People in the crowd began to whisper softly to each other, commenting on how skilled she was, how unlikely it seemed that someone who lived on the streets could play with such emotion and technique. They exchanged glances of disbelief and admiration, realizing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Some passersby who had not initially stopped were drawn in by the music. They slowed their pace, curious to see who was playing. As they approached, they could feel the power of the performance. Even those who had not cared for music before found themselves captivated. The notes seemed to reach into their hearts and minds, carrying emotions that were difficult to name. People began to smile, some with tears in their eyes, feeling unexpectedly touched by a stranger who they had initially underestimated. The girl's music shifted again, moving from a soft, gentle melody to a more uplifting and lively tune. The crowd responded almost instinctively, nodding their heads, tapping their feet, and smiling as the energy of the music lifted their spirits. Children clapped quietly in rhythm, careful not to break the spell. Adults began to feel a sense of hope and joy, realizing that even someone who had faced so many hardships could create something so beautiful and inspiring. The music spoke of resilience, of the ability to rise above difficulties and find light even in the darkest moments. The security guard stepped closer, now fully engaged in the performance. He had seen many people try and fail at the piano, but nothing compared to this. There was a precision in her playing that suggested hours of practice, but it was paired with an emotional depth that could not be taught. He wondered silently how someone in her position had discovered such talent, how she had kept it alive despite the challenges of her daily life. The thought made him admire her even more, and he realized that he had been too quick to judge her based on appearance alone. People began to record the performance on their phones, not to show off later, but because they wanted to remember the feeling the music had given them. They knew that something remarkable was happening, something that would not be easily forgotten. Even the tourists, who were used to seeing grand sights and organized performances, were captivated by the raw authenticity of what they were witnessing. The girl's music was unpolished in the way life often is, yet perfect in the way that emotion and talent combined to create something unforgettable. The girl did not seem to notice the growing attention. She played with her own sense of purpose, guided by an internal rhythm and emotion that seemed far larger than herself. Her fingers moved with confidence, gliding across the keys and creating harmonies that resonated with everyone present. The music seemed to tell stories that no one could put into words, stories of struggle, hope, sorrow, and joy. It was as if the piano had become a bridge between her world and the hearts of the people around her. The crowd grew quieter as the melody shifted to a reflective, softer tone. The music slowed slightly, carrying a weight that made the listeners pause and consider their own lives. Some people closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. They could feel the sincerity in each note, the honesty that came from someone who had lived a life far different from their own. The girl's performance was no longer just an act. It had become a shared emotional experience that united the crowd in a rare and profound way. The security guard felt an unexpected lump in his throat. He realized that he had judged the girl unfairly, had laughed along with the others, and yet here she was, proving something much greater than any words could express. She had transformed the square, made strangers pause, and touched hearts without a single word. He looked around and saw others doing the same, noticing the change in the energy of the crowd, the way people had softened and leaned in to feel the music more deeply. Some of the children began to hum along softly, following the tune instinctively. Their parents watched, eyes wide with amazement and pride. Even the older adults in the crowd felt their spirits lifted, sensing that life's beauty could appear in the most unexpected places and from the most unlikely people. The girl's hands continued to move effortlessly, and with each note, she seemed to pour more of herself into the music, giving the audience a glimpse into a world they would never fully understand, but could deeply feel. The melody shifted one more time, moving from reflective and soft to vibrant and joyful. The change was subtle but powerful, capturing the resilience and spirit of the girl herself. People in the crowd began to sway slightly, caught in the rhythm, smiling at each other as if sharing a secret about the wonder unfolding before them. The security guard's heart swelled with an unexpected sense of pride and respect. He realized that talent and passion could be found in the most unexpected places, and that judging people solely by appearances was a mistake he would not make again. The girl's music filled the square completely, drowning out the usual noise of the city. Horns honked in the distance, footsteps clattered on the pavement, and distant voices called out. But nothing could distract from the performance. Everyone listening was fully immersed, caught in the spell of the piano, unable to turn away. The emotional connection she had created was palpable, and it seemed as though time itself had slowed down to let this moment exist fully and beautifully. As the final notes of this part of her melody played, a soft hush fell over the crowd. People were still, holding their breath, not ready to break the silence. Even the security guard was quiet, letting the moment sink in. The girl looked down at the keys, took a gentle breath, and prepared to continue. The crowd waited in anticipation, eager to hear the next part of her story through the music, knowing that whatever came next would be just as extraordinary and moving as what they had just experienced. The notes continued to flow from the piano, weaving a story that was both powerful and delicate. The girl's hands moved with an elegance that seemed impossible for someone so young and so worn by life. Each movement of her fingers carried a sense of purpose, and the music grew more intricate with every passing moment. People in the crowd could feel the depth of her emotions through the sound, as if her life itself was pouring out through the instrument. The security guard watched closely, realizing he had underestimated her. He had been skeptical at first, thinking she was just another street performer hoping for coins. Now, he could see there was nothing ordinary about her. There was a precision in her playing, a natural understanding of the keys that spoke of hidden talent and countless hours of practice. Yet, it wasn't just technical skill that captivated the audience, it was the emotion behind the notes. Every chord seemed to carry a story, and every pause had a meaning of its own. Children in the crowd moved closer, their curiosity growing. They watched in awe, eyes wide, as her fingers danced across the keys. Some whispered to each other, trying to describe the feelings the music brought. The girl did not look at them, but the warmth in her playing seemed to embrace them anyway. Parents watched silently, realizing their children were witnessing something truly rare. They felt a mix of pride and wonder, as if the music had opened a door to a world they had never seen before. The girl's melody shifted again, this time becoming more reflective and slow. The crowd sensed a deeper story unfolding, a hint of sadness that lay beneath the surface of her playing. People looked at each other, understanding without words that this music carried more than just notes. It carried experience, loss, and survival. Some people in the audience closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, imagining the path she had walked to arrive at this moment. The city around the square seemed to quiet down, as if the world itself was listening. Horns in the distance faded into the background, footsteps slowed, and voices softened. Everyone present became part of the moment, connected by a shared recognition of beauty and vulnerability. The girl did not rush her playing. She allowed the melody to breathe, each note lingering in the air just long enough to touch hearts before moving on. The security guard felt a lump form in his throat. He thought of all the times he had judged people quickly, based on appearance or circumstance. He realized he had been wrong to do so. Here was someone who, despite life's hardships, had found a way to create something magnificent. She had taken her pain, her experiences, and transformed them into something that spoke directly to anyone willing to listen. He looked around and saw that he was not alone in feeling this way. Others were quietly moved, some with tears glistening in their eyes, some with faces softened by awe. As the melody continued, the girl's music became more layered, more complex. She moved between highs and lows, creating a sense of tension and release that held the audience's attention completely. The music seemed alive, telling a story that words could not capture. People felt emotion stir within them that they hadn't felt in a long time: hope, longing, sorrow, and a quiet joy that came from witnessing something extraordinary. The girl's hands glided over the keys effortlessly, yet there was a sense of intimacy in every movement. She was not performing for fame or reward. She was expressing herself in the only way she knew how. The crowd felt it, understood it, and respected it. Even strangers who had just walked by were drawn into the moment, stopping to watch and listen, feeling part of the story being told through the piano. The children, now completely captivated, leaned in closer, some sitting cross-legged on the pavement. They whispered to each other softly, asking questions they couldn't fully explain. One child tilted their head, saying quietly, "It's like she's talking to us without words." The parents smiled, realizing the truth in that statement. The girl's music communicated emotions that went beyond language. It touched something deep within, something everyone recognized but rarely felt so clearly. The security guard's eyes never left the piano. He had been responsible for maintaining order, for keeping the area safe. Yet now he felt as if he was witnessing a sacred moment. He had been skeptical, amused, and even dismissive at first, but now he understood. He realized that appearances could be deceiving, and talent could be hidden in the most unexpected places. He felt a deep respect for the girl, recognizing the courage it took to play in public, to be vulnerable in front of strangers, and to share her inner world through music. As the melody grew, it became more joyful, more hopeful. The music spoke of resilience, of rising above challenges, and of finding beauty despite hardship. People in the crowd began to respond unconsciously. They swayed slightly, tapping their feet, nodding their heads in rhythm with the music. Smiles appeared on faces that had been tense or distracted moments before. The girl's playing seemed to remind them of something they had forgotten, that even in difficult times, there could be moments of wonder and light. The girl played with an intensity that never seemed forced. Her fingers moved with precision, yet each note was filled with emotion. The crowd could sense that this was more than a performance. It was an offering, a gift to anyone willing to receive it. Some people took out their phones, not to record, but to capture the memory of the feeling the music had given them. They wanted to remember the way the notes had moved through the air, the way the music had made their hearts feel lighter, and the way the girl had held their attention so completely. Even the older adults in the crowd, who had seen many performances in their lives, were captivated. They whispered to each other in awe, commenting on the skill and emotion displayed by someone who had been underestimated. From the moment she approached the piano, the girl's music transcended age and experience, connecting everyone in the square through a shared sense of admiration and wonder. Her talent was undeniable, but it was the honesty and emotion in her playing that made it unforgettable. The girl's melody shifted once more, slowing down and softening, carrying a gentle melancholy. The crowd sensed a reflective moment, a pause in the story being told through the piano. People closed their eyes, letting the music guide them through memories and feelings of their own. Some thought of lost loved ones, some thought of dreams they had once had, and some simply felt a quiet connection to the girl's story. The music had become a bridge between her world and theirs, a silent conversation carried out in notes and rhythm. The security guard felt a deep respect for her grow with every passing moment. He understood now that her presence was more than just an attempt to entertain. She had a story to tell, a voice that could not be silenced, and a gift that could reach hearts in ways words never could. He watched as she played, thinking about all the times he had been quick to judge others, and silently promised himself he would not do so again. The girl had reminded him, and everyone around her, that there was more to people than appearances and first impressions. The children were completely entranced now. One of them whispered, "She makes the piano sing." Others nodded, not fully understanding the words, but feeling the truth in them. Parents watched, feeling proud and amazed that their children were experiencing something so powerful. At such a young age, they realized that this was a rare moment, one that would stay with them long after they left the square. The girl's playing grew stronger again, her fingers flying across the keys with confidence and grace. The crowd leaned in, unable to tear their eyes away. The music seemed to carry a sense of triumph, as if telling a story of overcoming challenges and finding strength in unexpected places. Every note resonated with the people listening, evoking feelings of hope, resilience, and the beauty that could emerge from even the most difficult circumstances. The city square had transformed. It was no longer just a place of movement and noise. It had become a space of shared emotion, where strangers connected through the power of music. People who had never met felt a bond, a silent understanding that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The girl's presence, once overlooked, had now become the center of attention, not for fame or recognition, but because of the pure, heartfelt way she expressed herself. As the final notes of this part of her performance faded, a quiet hush fell over the crowd. People stood still, not wanting to break the spell of the moment. The security guard felt his chest tighten, overcome by a sense of admiration and respect he could not fully express. Children clutched the edges of their parents' hands, wide-eyed and silent, while adults wiped away tears they hadn't realized were forming. The girl looked down at the keys, her eyes soft but focused, ready to continue the story she was telling through her music. The moment was complete yet fleeting, a delicate memory created in the middle of an ordinary day. The audience had been transformed by her presence, by the honesty and power of her music. They would carry this experience with them, feeling the echo of her notes in their hearts long after they left the square. The girl had taken her life, her experiences, and her pain, and turned it into something beautiful, touching everyone who was willing to listen. The afternoon had shifted into early evening, and the sunlight was softer now, casting long shadows across the square. The city's usual noise had faded into the background, replaced by the lingering sound of the piano. The girl's fingers moved with increasing confidence, her music filling the space in ways that seemed almost magical. People who had once hurried past were now entirely focused on her, captivated by the raw emotion in every note. Her melody had grown in intensity and depth, a combination of gentle sadness and subtle triumph. Each note carried meaning, a fragment of her story that she shared without speaking a single word. The crowd felt it all, the pain, the struggle, the small victories of someone who had lived on the streets, yet had not lost her ability to feel deeply or create beauty. People instinctively leaned closer, as if moving nearer to hear every note meant understanding her story more fully. The security guard, who had been watching quietly, felt an unfamiliar tug at his heart. He had never thought a street performance could move him like this. He had always expected music to be entertaining, but this was different. There was honesty in every chord, a sense of life and experience that could not be taught. His chest tightened as he realized that this girl, someone he would have dismissed in the past, was capable of stirring emotions far stronger than he could imagine. Children in the crowd sat cross-legged, eyes wide, completely absorbed. Some whispered to each other, their voices barely audible, sharing thoughts about the music they could not fully explain. Parents watched them, their own faces softening as they witnessed the connection being formed. The girl did not look at them directly, yet the warmth in her music enveloped them. It was as if her melody had the power to reach everyone equally, no matter who they were or where they came from. The melody began to change again, flowing into a more sorrowful, reflective tone. It was the kind of sadness that did not feel hopeless, but instead carried with it a quiet dignity. People in the crowd instinctively understood that they were hearing the struggles of a life that had known hardship and loss. Some closed their eyes, allowing themselves to feel the emotions being conveyed. Others looked at one another with soft expressions, recognizing a shared human experience that transcended language, age, or background. The girl's hands moved with precision and grace, yet each note was filled with emotion. The crowd sensed that she was pouring herself into the music, offering a piece of her soul to anyone who would listen. It was impossible not to feel the depth of her feelings, the life she had lived, and the resilience that had carried her to this moment. Even those who were usually indifferent or impatient felt compelled to stay, to witness and honor the story she was telling. The security guard's eyes misted as he watched her play. He thought of all the times he had judged people too quickly, assuming he could see their value based on appearance alone. He realized he had been wrong, and that this girl, who seemed fragile and overlooked, possessed a strength and talent far beyond what anyone had expected. He shifted slightly, careful not to draw attention, but the weight of what he was witnessing pressed gently on his chest. The melody transitioned into a softer, more intimate phase. The music carried a sense of vulnerability, as though the girl were revealing a part of herself she had kept hidden for a long time. The audience leaned in instinctively, feeling privileged to witness such a moment. Even strangers who had just arrived in the square paused, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding. Their hurried lives slowed as they absorbed the depth and beauty of her music. Children's whispers had turned into quiet humming as they tried to follow the notes. Parents watched, sometimes with tears glistening, understanding that this was a rare moment of connection. Adults exchanged glances, some nodding silently to each other, acknowledging the profound effect the music had on them. It was impossible to remain unaffected. The girl had a gift, but more importantly, She had the courage to share it with the world despite her circumstances. The music grew stronger, carrying a sense of hope amidst the sorrow. Each note felt deliberate, full of intention, as if the girl were telling her story in chapters. The audience felt a shift, as if the weight of her struggles was now balanced by an emerging sense of triumph. Some people instinctively clapped along softly, while others nodded in silent acknowledgement of her strength. The square had transformed into a place of shared emotion, a space where strangers were united by the power of one person's music. The security guard, moved beyond words, stepped slightly closer, trying to understand how someone so young and worn by life could express so much. He had watched countless performers over the years, but nothing had ever touched him like this. He realized that talent could appear in the most unlikely places, and that true emotion could reach hearts in ways that nothing else could. The girl's performance was no longer just about music. It was about connection, about humanity, about reminding everyone present that life, despite its hardships, could still create moments of beauty. The girl's melody shifted once more, blending sorrow and hope seamlessly. The music seemed to breathe, moving through highs and lows, carrying the audience along on a journey of feeling and reflection. The people in the square felt their own experiences intertwining, with the story being told through the piano. Some remembered personal struggles, some thought of dreams that had been lost and regained, and some simply felt a quiet sense of gratitude for being present to witness this gift. The children were now silent, completely absorbed in the story told by the piano. Their parents' faces were soft with wonder, their eyes occasionally glistening with tears. Even older adults, who had seen much of life's complexity, were moved, recognizing in her music the truth of human resilience and hope. The girl's hands moved over the keys effortlessly, each note striking with clarity and emotion, reinforcing the sense that she had found her voice and was determined to share it. The melody continued to rise, stronger and more vibrant, filling the square with a sense of triumph. The audience began to respond unconsciously, tapping their feet, swaying slightly, smiling at one another in shared understanding. The girl's music spoke of resilience, of overcoming challenges, and of the small victories that often go unnoticed. Every person listening could feel the story within her music, a story of endurance, courage, and unspoken dreams. The security guard felt his emotions swell as he watched. He had been part of many events in the square before, but nothing compared to this. The girl had transformed the space with her presence, creating a moment that was larger than the city itself. He realized that the world could be harsh and judgmental, but moments like this reminded him that beauty and humanity could shine through the most unlikely people. The crowd, now fully attentive, felt a profound connection forming. Strangers who had never met exchanged smiles and quiet nods, acknowledging the rare gift they were witnessing. Children sat quietly, absorbing the music, while adults quietly wiped away tears, touched by the authenticity of her performance. Even those who had initially been skeptical found themselves leaning in, unable to resist the pull of her music. The girl's melody softened again, moving into a reflective, gentle passage. The audience felt the subtle vulnerability in each note, the tenderness that spoke of hope intertwined with hardship. It was impossible not to be moved, not to feel the honesty of her expression, and not to recognize the courage it took for her to share this part of herself in public. The music had become a bridge, connecting her heart to the hearts of everyone listening. The security guard felt tears form and quickly blinked them away, humbled by what he was witnessing. He realized that the girl, once overlooked and underestimated, had created something remarkable. She had transformed the square, touched hearts, and reminded everyone of the power of vulnerability and courage. The children, parents, and older adults were all silent in reverence, feeling the depth of her story and the sincerity of her performance. The melody grew once more, rising with a sense of hope and light. The girl's fingers moved deftly across the keys, creating harmony and emotion that resonated deeply. The audience could feel the shift, the story moving toward a sense of resolution and triumph. Her music spoke of survival, of the strength to keep going, and of the beauty that could emerge even from difficult circumstances. People swayed, smiled, and whispered softly to each other, sharing a collective understanding of what they were experiencing. As the final notes of this part of her performance faded, a hush fell over the square. The moment was complete, yet every person present felt its weight and significance. The security guard's chest tightened as he reflected on what he had seen. The girl had transformed the ordinary into something extraordinary, creating a shared experience that would linger in the hearts of everyone present. Children clutched their parents' hands, Adults wiped tears quietly, and the older members of the crowd nodded with understanding and admiration. The girl looked down at the piano, her eyes calm but focused, ready to continue her story and carry the audience even further on the journey her music had begun. The square had grown quiet as the girl continued to play, each note echoing in the hearts of everyone present. Her music was no longer just a melody. It had become a story, a journey that carried the weight of her life and the dreams she still held. People had stopped moving, stopped talking, and even the city around them seemed to pause, as if the music had reached out and softened the edges of their hurried world. Children leaned forward on their knees, eyes wide with awe, while parents watched silently, feeling a mix of pride and wonder. Older adults who had seen much of life's unpredictability nodded slowly, moved by the honesty and emotion in her playing. The security guard, who had spent much of the day watching the girl with quiet skepticism, now stood fully attentive, his eyes glistening with tears he tried to hide. He realized that he had underestimated her, and he felt humbled by the strength and talent of someone society might have overlooked. Her hands moved with grace and confidence, gliding across the keys as if the piano itself had become an extension of her being. The melody rose and fell with a natural rhythm, carrying the audience along on waves of emotion. There was sorrow, yes, but it was balanced by hope, resilience, and a quiet sense of triumph. Each note seemed to communicate something words could never fully capture, connecting everyone present to the girl's story in a deeply personal way. People in the crowd whispered softly to each other, sharing their reactions and emotions. Some admitted to tears, others smiled quietly, touched in ways they could not describe. Strangers exchanged glances, acknowledging the rare beauty of what they were witnessing. Even those who had arrived late, unaware of the performance until the music reached their ears, stopped in their tracks, drawn to the piano as if pulled by an invisible thread. The melody shifted again, becoming more intricate, more expressive. The girl's fingers flew across the keys, producing harmonies that were both surprising and deeply moving. The audience felt themselves being carried along, swept into the story that was unfolding through her music. It was a story of struggle and endurance, of small victories hidden in a life that had not always been kind. The music spoke of her journey without a single word, yet everyone listening understood it fully. The children began to hum softly, echoing the tune in their own innocent way. Parents watched them with quiet smiles, realizing that this was more than just a performance. It was a lesson in resilience, in the beauty of self-expression, and in the power of art to touch hearts. Older adults nodded, feeling the emotional depth of the girl's playing, recognizing the courage it must have taken to share something so personal in a public space. The security guard, standing a few feet away, felt a mix of pride and humility. He had seen people try to entertain for attention or money, but he had never witnessed such raw talent and emotion coming from someone who had so little in the world. He understood now that appearances could be deceiving, and that true greatness often hid in the most unexpected places. His heart swelled as he realized the impact this girl was having on everyone around her. The music shifted once more, softer now, carrying a gentle vulnerability that touched the audience deeply. The girl's hands moved with subtle grace, every note deliberate and meaningful. It was a quiet moment of reflection, allowing the listeners to feel her journey, her struggles, and the beauty she had discovered despite everything. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, while others simply watched in silence, fully present to the extraordinary moment unfolding before them. The square was no longer just a busy intersection of city life. It had become a sanctuary, a shared space where strangers connected through the honesty and depth of her music. The children were completely absorbed, leaning in closer, while adults felt the weight of the story and its emotional resonance. Even tourists who had passed by stopped, understanding that they were witnessing something unique, a rare gift that went beyond entertainment. The girl's fingers danced across the keys with renewed energy, lifting the melody toward a triumphant, uplifting phase. The crowd responded instinctively, swaying slightly, tapping feet, and whispering words of encouragement and admiration. The music spoke of hope and possibility, of finding light even in the darkest moments. It was as if the piano had become a bridge between her world and everyone else's, a language that transcended age, background, and circumstance. The security guard felt tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by the beauty and depth of what he was witnessing. He thought of all the times he had judged people based on appearances, and he silently promised himself he would never do that again. He watched as the girl poured everything she had into the music, Understanding that this was more than a performance, it was an expression of her life, her courage, and her resilience, the melody softened briefly, creating a reflective space in the music. The audience felt the pause, the gentle interlude that allowed them to breathe and reflect on the emotions they had just experienced. Some remembered their own struggles, some felt gratitude for the moment of beauty, and others simply felt a quiet sense of awe. The girls' music had created a collective experience that united everyone present, leaving a lasting impression that would not soon fade. Then, with a subtle change in rhythm, the music began to rise again, building toward a final, emotional climax. The girls' hands moved with precision and passion, each note carefully placed, each chord full of emotion. The audience could feel the crescendo approaching, a wave of sound and feeling that would carry them to the peak of the story. There was anticipation in the air, a shared understanding that something remarkable was about to happen. The children clutched their parents' hands, their eyes wide with wonder, while adults held their breath, feeling the emotional intensity of the music. The security guard stood motionless, fully absorbed, his heart racing with the power of the moment. Everyone in the square was connected, bound together by the girl's extraordinary gift and the honesty with which she shared it. It was a rare and beautiful moment that transcended the ordinary rhythms of city life. The girl's melody reached its peak, powerful yet delicate, carrying every emotion she had experienced into the air. The music spoke of triumph over adversity, of hope that refused to be extinguished, and of the human spirit's ability to create beauty even in difficult circumstances. Tears streamed down faces throughout the crowd, some openly, some quietly, as the weight and meaning of the performance sank in. Even the security guard, unable to contain his emotions, wiped his eyes discreetly, overwhelmed by the raw beauty of what he was witnessing. As the final notes rang out, a silence fell over the square, profound and complete. It was not the silence of emptiness, but a silence filled with reverence and awe. The crowd held its breath, savoring the lingering sound, the memory of every note, and the deep emotional connection they had shared. The girl looked down at the keys, her face calm and focused. Yet there was a quiet satisfaction in her expression. She had given everything she had, and the audience understood that fully. Then, as if releasing a collective exhale, the crowd erupted into applause. The sound was immediate, enthusiastic, and heartfelt. People cheered, clapped, and even cried openly, moved by the performance they had just witnessed. The security guard approached cautiously, offering a respectful nod and a soft smile, acknowledging her talent and courage. Children shouted their delight, parents joined in the applause, and older adults clapped slowly, savoring every moment. Some people in the crowd stepped forward, offering coins and notes, but it was not about the money. It was about showing appreciation for the music, for the courage it took to perform, and for the gift she had shared with everyone present. Others simply stayed silent, smiling or wiping tears, feeling that words were not necessary. The girl received the recognition quietly, not boasting, not asking for attention, but acknowledging the gratitude of those around her with a soft, humble smile. A local music teacher, who had been watching from the back of the crowd, approached her carefully, offering a gentle suggestion. He could see her talent, and he wanted to help her develop it further. He spoke softly, explaining that with guidance and lessons, her music could reach even more people and touch even more hearts. The girl listened, nodding with quiet determination, understanding that this was an opportunity to take the gift she had nurtured on the streets and expand it into something even greater. The square gradually returned to its normal rhythm, but the memory of the performance lingered in the air. People slowly dispersed, carrying with them the emotions, the beauty, and the inspiration they had experienced. The girl, having played her heart out, stood quietly by the piano for a moment, taking in the applause and the smiles round her. She had shared her story, touched lives, and left a mark on everyone who had listened. The security guard stayed for a while, reflecting on what he had seen. He realized that judging others based on appearances could blind a person to extraordinary possibilities. He had witnessed talent, courage, and resilience in someone society might have overlooked, and it had left an indelible impression on him. Children skipped away happily, parents talked softly among themselves, and older adults nodded in quiet appreciation, all carrying a piece of the magic the girl had created. As the evening sun dipped lower, casting a warm glow